Welcome back to the Alpine Rose. Season 3, Episode 4, Building the Log Walls. We've got logs stacked on every available piece of land. Anywhere you can get a forklift to, we've got logs. The engineered plans are very detailed on how to connect the logs, the spacing of the screws, number of screws, and so on. I also received a PDF copy so I could look at it online and zoom in close so I could see detail. This was great detail to have. In fact, the more the better. The kit also came with a building guide. The building guide detailed what type of logs came in the kit. For example, notch logs were for corners. Half starter logs and full starter logs were for the first course of logs. Cuda cut logs are for butting up against the post. This drawing shows spikes. My kit came with 12-inch lag bolts. So the first thing to do was start to get the logs up to the house. I used the forklift since it was still under rental and began bringing over different logs based on their size. The logs were just over 10 pounds per foot. In other words, a 6-foot log was about 60 pounds and so on. I utilized the forklift to bring up the larger logs and by hand to bring up the smaller logs. In some cases, I used my tractor to bring up multiples. It's now August, and in August is the warmest month of the year. Temperatures hit 80 to 85 degrees at the Rose, but if you're in the sun, it feels like 120. I organized all the logs so that I knew which stack was which. I located the half log starters and the full log starters. The half log starters would be on the long walls, which would be the east-west walls, and the full log starters are going to be on the north-south walls, or the short walls. Holes had to be drilled into the half starter logs and the full starter logs where the anchor bolts were that connected to the foundation. All these had to be countersunk as well. The full log starters had a flat bottom so they'd sit flat on the floor, but they had to be fastened down to the anchors as well. The first few rows didn't have any openings except for doors, so you could use long logs for this as long as they're notched on one end. One of the biggest challenges I had is the back wall. The logs were notched on one end, but they had to join up in the middle. When you're using a chainsaw, it's tough to be exact. I no longer had the forklift to bring the large logs to the floor, so I started bringing them with my tractor and then setting one end up on the floor. I used little short logs so I could roll the logs like the Egyptians did. I also marked off the area that the stairway is going to go downstairs with the buckets and boards because I wanted to get in the habit of knowing where that was. I had marked the window openings and the door openings on the floor. Once we got to window height, then I could start using the shorter logs as long as I overlapped them into the window frame. We can go back at a later time and cut those out. My logs were the 9-inch logs that were Swedish cope, which meant the top of the log was rounded and the bottom of the log had a notch cut out of it. Near the windows and doors, you needed to stagger the screws. But keep the screws away from the opening. Chainsaws do not like those steel screws. I continued to add logs, and much easier in the corner because the logs being smaller, they're easier to lift. While doing this job with just myself, I was worried about setting one end of the log up on the wall, bringing the other end up, and the whole thing rolling off. and actually that didn't happen once. As I used logs from different groups, I swear I had more logs than I started with. There were specific logs that were made for poles that were vertical and, for example, CUDA cut, which attached to poles. Here's one window cut out just so I know what it looks like. I had to cover logs on a regular basis to keep the rain from getting those wet, and I also had to put down plastic to keep the floor from getting wet. I bought a new shop vac so I could keep up with the afternoon thunderstorms. Once I hit about chest high, a little higher, then I needed some help. I found this HVAC lift at Sun Rentals, and what a lifesaver this was. It wasn't meant for this purpose, but I made do. It had two arms on it that could go up and down with a crank. I wish the arms were spread apart a little bit further, but it still worked perfect for this job. I had planned openings, one on the side near the garage, the other going out to the patio. After the openings was going to be a short log and then the corner. So I started putting in the corner, and this is where I utilized the CUDA cut logs. The CUDA cut logs had a notch in one end that wraps around a pole. And in my instance, the other end was a corner notch. I used my tractor to stand the pole up, and then I used the hoist to actually help me steady it until I had enough CUDAs in place. Once I had enough logs in place, I knew the post wasn't going to move. The top of the post would eventually be cut off at an angle to match the roof pitch.
Come, Michelle.
Yeah,
baby.
What's the sound he makes when he gets one of those little things? Diddle-dee-dee, diddle-dee-dee.
Because none of the logs were stained, I felt like I had to constantly keep them covered up and constantly remove water. Once you have the walls tall enough that you can picture where the windows are going to be, you can identify the rooms, you'll know roughly the size of your house. It's quite the feeling. Now if I can just keep it dry until I get the roof on, that's a challenge. I was planning a door on the west side and just wanted to make sure I keep the opening small enough, but this is where I actually had a couple lag screws that stuck inside the doorway because I wanted to go with a bigger door. I finally cut out the opening to the staircase going down to the basement. Hindsight, I probably should have held off on doing this to a later date. So you continue to add logs, covering up the tops of the windows until you reach what's called the top wall log. The top wall log on both the east and the west sides, we're going to have an angled surface on the top, and that's where the ceiling joists will rest. Once you install the top wall log, then you have to come down to the log below that and start putting in notches. Notches had to be chiseled out on the top log wall according to the specs, and the floor joists had to be cut like a tenon to fit into the joint. This is just an example. Here you can see the notches on the top log. There was also a notch that had to be cut in the back wall that the GL beam fit into. So the next part was getting everything ready to install the two large character posts. These posts were part of the support for the bearing wall that ran down the center beam of the house. The bearing wall would support the joists in the middle, and the notches in the outer wall would support the joists on the outer wall. This picture shows the floor joist for the upper level with the tenon cut. I also began cutting out the doors and the windows to see what kind of issues I ran into there. I could see another challenge as far as the top and the bottom of the windows. For example, on the north wall, I had a whole log below the window. On the west wall, I'd have half a log, which meant I had to do a horizontal cut with a chainsaw. So in deciding on how I'm going to put in the tall character posts, I found a truck for sale with a boom lift up in Wyoming. So I took a road trip to Newcastle, Wyoming, about 5.5 hours north. I took some pictures of the boom truck when I got there, but I can't find the damn pics. The boom worked great, but the truck was a dog. The truck started and ran great, but it was very slow on the highway. It'd be great on my road, it'd be great in the mountains, but it was a dog when it came to the highway. I figured I'd have to put it on a flatbed to get it to my property, and then I could use it. And the cost of the flatbed to truck it and the cost of the boom, I just decided to rent a local boom instead. I decided I'd concentrate on getting everything ready and then rent a boom truck locally. This is a pretty good up-close shot of what the notches look like. So I scheduled a boom truck rental. It's just a matter of waiting for them to show up. So I had to make sure I had everything in place for what we needed. I rented a second hoist so that we could have everything ready for when we rented the boom truck. The boom truck is to bring the character post to the point of the house where we attach the GL beam and then attach joists from the outside walls to the character post. What pictures I have of this, my wife was able to take while I'm actually coordinating the install. Also, my daughter and her husband were here to help out. The first character post was about 12 feet from the back wall. We had the boom truck set it in place while we supported it with 2x6s. In this picture you see the second character post sitting on my trailer in front of the house. So we had the GL beam supported on the back of the house by one of the hoists. It was also attached to one of the floor joists, so we had an exact measurement coming from the wall. We also had one of the floor joists ready to be attached to the front character post.
Let me know if you need something later. Catch it, we can just come that way.
So the back character post had to be notched out for the GL beam to fit. One thing interesting about building a log home, the horizontal logs on the outside of the house are going to shrink. So the GL beam where it attaches to the log wall is 1 inch higher than where it attaches to the character post. In other words, they expect the wall to shrink by 1 inch, but the post will not shrink. Once we have the back post in place, it's time to put the front one in place.
Yes, we could have done this.
You wanted to lift on it?
Yeah, it's fine. Would you plug it in place? Oh, never mind. That's good. Where's your sunglasses? Oh, get Mom's sunglasses.
So it's not straight? That's my foot there.
The character posts are about 24 feet tall. We brought it over to the deck of the house so that we could get a new grip on it so we can raise it in place. My cameraman starts getting a little wonky here. So this character post is connected by a floor joist. The post has to have a notch where the floor joist fits into it. The bottom of the post is sitting where it's supposed to, but we have to line up the floor joist and then pound the post into place. The crane operator actually joined in and helped us out using a sledgehammer to help us pound the post into place. Here's how it looked once the posts are in place and we have all the 2x6 support beams holding it from left to right, front to back. And then now here it is with all the floor joists in place for the upper level. Here's a close-up showing how the floor joist is attached to the GL beam. And another showing the floor joist connected to the wall. And here's the floor joist connecting to the character post. Thanks for watching.